Hello, welcome to Book and Lounge, a podcast that helps you find your next great read. If you're enjoying the podcast, please don't forget to subscribe, download, and share with your friends, family, and colleagues. Your support really means a lot to us. The more you share, the more we can bring more exciting episodes to you. Now let's get back to today's episode. So we are talking about The First Woman by Jennifer. I should know her name. I should know her name by now. Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi. Sorry?
Makumbi.
Yes, Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi. So it's a third book. The first book was Into, and then she has a collection of short stories which she wrote after Shinto, called And Manchester Happened. So this is her third book. And I think she possibly is working on her fourth book because I asked her to come along onto the podcast.
I thought you were going to surprise her and say, here she is.
That would have been nice. But unfortunately, I can't. It was too short notice. So apparently at the moment, she's not accepting any events without notice. So her notice period is 6 months. Anyway, so coming on to The First Woman, you recommended it. So I'm going to ask you to say what it's about.
So it's a story about a young girl growing up in Uganda, and it starts with her living in a sort of a village life, continues on to her going to school in a very well-off, a very good school. Yeah. And through, some people are calling it coming of age, aren't they? She sort of the growing up period, coming into being a young adult. I mean, although I said she's in the village, she's obviously one of the wealthy people in the village, her family. Mm-hmm. So they can send her to this very good school. And it picks up on a lot of issues to do with feminism. And Jackie, you put it so much better than me.
No, that's fine. That's the thing. I was just going to say, just to add on to that, it's also set in the 60s, I think 70s. It's mainly set in the 1970s and then beginning of the 80s. And so it's set against the political backdrop of what was happening in Uganda at the time. And you also get to see a little bit of the politics kind of steeping in and then how it affects their life. Although there's not too much of it, thank goodness, because I think she did a lot of politics in Shinto, and I'm quite happy that there was not that much in this one.
Mm-hmm. Why is that?
Sorry?
Why are you happy there were less politics in this one compared to Shinto?
I think we do talk a lot about politics for a start, and I think it's a big enough book as it is. And I think just adding in the politics, because the politics it's a bit complicated. Adding in the politics maybe would have made it a much bigger book than it already is. And there's already enough issues for me that she's addressed in the book without having then to focus on the politics and the things that were happening on the political scene at the time.
I understand that. I just maybe we'll get into it. For me, I found that really interesting. That she kind of, it's something I'm aware of, but I don't know in detail about. Mm-hmm. So that she was able to articulate this story against that backdrop, and she touches on the experience, the soldiers coming in, I don't want to jump ahead, but the particular storyline about they're at boarding school and fathers are disappearing, and she could have talked about that in a really kind of blunt way. These fathers are disappearing, they're probably dying in very horrific circumstances. But to tell that story from the perspective of this girl didn't go home, or, the teachers kept this girl back, or I just thought that was quite moving. Okay.
So as we've already started then, so I guess if you could just talk about thoughts on the book, what you like to dislike, and your favourite bits.
For me, I felt like because it was set in Uganda, kind of a time of turmoil. I felt I was learning as much about the politics of the country. I liked the way, particularly the relationships between the women were written. not just as a child, but as she grows older. And then perhaps we'll talk about this confrontation between two friends and this, there is some, perhaps the naivety on the part of our lead character about her privilege compared to perhaps some of the other characters. I thought that story was told really well. I think the story about the politics, about this difference between village life and city life. I thought, I didn't know what to expect with this book. I picked it up and thought, oh my God, this is a long book. Let's go. But I really ended up loving it. I really did. And to me, it was the blend of the kind of the social commentary and just this story about a young girl making her way in the world and learning harsh truths in a way that felt realistic, not overly pessimistic, but not overly optimistic. I just really enjoyed it.
I like the headings. I don't think they're chapter. I think maybe they're more like parts or sections, the witch, the bitch. When the villages were young, and especially why pecked hens peck each other. I thought those were really well thought out segment headings, if you want to call it that. I love the relationship between the two main women, the way in which she portrayed the social structure of village life as well as rural life, and how modernity was clashing with traditional customs and the cultural way of doing things that they've done from time immemorial, and how modernity was changing things, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But there was that clash. But the whole communal approach to life where, it takes a village to raise a child. I liked that view of having two mothers. I thought that was really done, especially where the mothers don't necessarily always agree with each other. I thought that was insightful. And also the way that she drew the main character, Kirabo, the growth of her as she moved from adolescence, or from girlhood to adolescence, to being a young woman. I thought that was well done. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I really did.
And Katrina, you recommended it. Why did you recommend it?
I recommended it because I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I thought other people might. But what Taiwo has just been touching on, the other ladies in the story, I didn't mention them when you asked me to explain it, but of course a lot of the book is also about the life of the grandmothers involved. And I think, if you say my favourite parts, I actually enjoyed them the most. I love the way these ladies who, couldn't just divorce their partners or just walk out and start again, really. How they dealt with the different situations they were in and how they handled it, and the advice they were giving to younger women. And I'm including it's Chirabu's father's mother-in-law as well in that. I just love listening to these old people and the way they talk about things, and it came across very genuine to me.
Yeah, I agree with what you've all said. It's a really it's a really gripping book, and I think the reason I found that is you touched on the social commentary of what was happening at the time, but intertwined with the stories of these women. And it is a book about women, the stories of these women and how they've been affected by patriarchal society that they live in, and how they're trying to come out of that. But I think that the thing that I enjoyed the most from this is the sense of community and the communal aspect of it, where all these women just get together and try and solve problems. And I think we've unfortunately lost some of that, where we that sense of community, because people are now moving towards the city and living in the cities. I think what touched me most about this book is the fact that I've walked the streets that she's talking about. I've gone to some of the schools that she's writing about, and I lived on the street that Auntie Abby lived on. So for me, it felt like a very personal experience. And also the time that she was writing about, I was a young child, but I still remember some of the events that she's talking about. So for me, it felt very personal. And I think that's probably why I enjoyed it the most. That and the humor. She has got a way with words. I just found myself laughing at some of the terms of phrases that she was using. Favorite parts? I don't think I can pick one, because there were just so many parts of it that just had me like laughing and contemplating and thinking, how did she come up with that? Very good book. And good choice, Katrina.
I wanted to say that many times when authors talk about past events, particularly when they're talking about village life, let's say in Africa, then they tend to, or there may be a tendency to infuse it with sepia tones and idealize it as if to say it was all perfect. But I like the way in which she addresses the fact that there were clashes, and sometimes the differences in terms of perspective or view were not necessarily resolved in the way that was best for everyone. But she's more showing things warts and all. She's showing the downsides of communal living, where everyone kind of knows your business. Something happens in one village and the next 5 villages, everyone knows. And, they're telling you this is what is being said at home. So you need to go home to straighten things out. So there is that as well. And I like how she doesn't shy away from it. She doesn't pretend that doesn't happen.
But she also shows the clash between, the contrast between village life and city life. And I like the way she contrasted how life was living life was in the village, and then coming to the city, and how that changed and how people lived in the city. I think she also did that very well. And also showing how, as time progressed, village life was slowly being eroded, their way of life, and because the city was expanding. And so when Kirabo goes back after she's finished school, you can see a big difference to what life is like now compared to what it was like as when she was growing up.
I agree with that. But even within that, I thought some of her commentary about city life is maybe relevant to kind of living today. So I thought what came through in particular was almost this veneer of respectability about city life that doesn't hold up. It looks good, but there's nothing much underneath it. And I think we see that towards the end of the book, where that paragraph just really struck me. It stayed with me. But all these things are being packed up. And what she finds disconcerting, that a wealthy man can have all these things in a lorry in this way.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like wealth.
Yeah.
And, the point there about what do you really value? What is wealth to you? What is well-being and stability? I just thought that came through so strongly. And one of the things I was particularly interested about, you said kind of your personal connection to this and that feeling of familiarity. I'd be interested to kind of hear your reflections, particularly on the boarding school scenes. I thought she captured that really well. I've never been to boarding school, but I really got this sense of it's about performing well. There's a competitiveness. It's slightly claustrophobic. There's a way of doing things. There's a bit of a regime. The bitchiness, the nastiness, but also some of the friendship that comes through.
Yeah. So I went to boarding school in primary. So I think Kirabo goes in secondary. So I never experienced boarding school in secondary. But the day that she was dropped off, and that feeling of, oh my God, you're on your own after your parents have left, I really, really identified with that. And then the fact that the way the dormitories were set up, with the bunk beds. When she was lucky, they were lucky. They were allowed to take a whole load of things out. When I went to a Catholic boarding school run by nuns, and you know what nuns are like. You were allowed 3 dresses, and 3 green dresses and 1 blue dress. The blue dress was for Sundays and for days when you had visitors or ceremonies, or you were going to competitions with other schools. The green dresses were the ones that you wore every day. You took your own. You took your own mattress. You took your own bunk bed. I remember we took our own bunk bed.
You took your own bunk bed and mattress?
We did. Yes, we did.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, the metal suitcases. I mean, she had a wooden suitcase, but we had metal suitcases. So all of that, I identified with the hunger that she talks about, the lack of food. I got that. through all of that, I would still say that today, throughout my school life, my boarding school days were like the best days of my childhood, basically, because we got to play. You made friends. We took the mickey out of each other. I remember there was this one girl. She told us about a waterbed, and obviously nobody believed that there was any such thing as a waterbed. So from that day on, her name became Waterbed. We just called her Waterbed. And then we had another teacher who said a teacher's job is to model and shape a child. And from that day on, her name was Model and Shape. So we had so much fun. But I think I didn't really see much of the rivalry because, as I said, we were primary school age. So there wasn't none of that. I think when you get to secondary school, that's where all of that comes out. But the work ethic, the studying, that was tough because you were graded, and you were graded according to your abilities. First of all, you're put in sets. And then within the sets, when the exams came, you're graded first to the last. If you were last or in the last 5, I think, you were beaten in assembly in front of everybody. So it was a tough life.
And what's Waterbed up to these days?
I have no idea. Unfortunately, we kind of left in a haste. So I never got to keep in touch with anybody because I was picked up. I was just finished my mock exams before then heading on to secondary school, and we got picked up halfway through term, and that was it on a flight to London. But yeah, so that was boarding school. So when she was describing, the baths in the first time she goes to have a wash. Yeah, that one, I identified with that. We did that. You're kind of very self-conscious.
Yeah.
So that was
interesting as well, isn't it? Because it was a single-sex school.
Yeah.
And so the dynamics, I assume, would be different to if it were co-ed.
I can't imagine that there are many co-ed boarding schools in Uganda.
Yeah, I think I had the bit that resonated in that whole school experience was the single sex and the being around just girls. I went to a girls' school. Obviously, it wasn't boarding, but the dynamics, this sense of who's the top girl at the moment, and friendships, being really close with some and being against those group. I thought she brought those out really well, and that felt real to me. Friends one minute, the next minute you're not friends, and you know what girls are like when they get together, they can be really mean.
They can.
I always say, there is nothing that you can say to me today that I haven't. I went to a girls' school, Teflon. That's the worst of it.
Went to a girls' school. I don't remember that sort of. I mean, I think I saw it, but it wasn't the groups that I was around. Wasn't really like that. But what really did resonate for me, I think maybe it's a Catholic girls' school thing, the grading business. Because when I started at secondary, which was in Wimbledon, the Ursuline in Wimbledon, at the end of half term or each month, I can't remember, you all paraded around and you had your marks, they called it marks, your marks were called out, and you, they were obviously an average or an amalgamation, and you had to go and take up positions according to your marks. So obviously if you hadn't done very well, you ended up in a line of those people who hadn't done very well so that everybody could see you. It's public humiliation. There was no beating, just public humiliation to encourage you on your way.
It seems like a Catholic thing.
It seems like it.
I don't think our grades were ever shared publicly, but you knew they had sets and grading, and that became that was a hierarchy on itself that you used to judge other girls against. So you had set one and set the top two sets, but if you were in one, people, that information, that didn't stay private for long.
In some ways, I'm wondering the idea that you put people in sets according to their ability, and then you grade them within the sets. And then if they don't pass a certain class, you make them repeat. I'm judging that against the system that we have here, where everybody, no matter how well you do, you move on to the next stage. You study according to your age. I'm just trying to weigh up which one, I guess, is better if you can do that.
Yeah, you do get. So I was definitely born in the latter. You kind of move up according to your age, but the opportunities within that do differ. Like I do remember, for example, my memory of GCSE is there's a paper you could take where you were aiming for a top grade, and then there was a foundation paper where the highest grade I think you could get was a C.
Yeah.
Or something like that. So there was a way of differentiating, like even within the year. And again, it was everyone knew. And also, I didn't go to a Catholic school. I went to a Church of England school. So there was this religious undertone to it as well. Sometimes I felt about this sense of goodness and doing well and representing and being, it was all girls and women together. So I think those themes played into it as well. I don't know whether that made it harsher or made it a more encouraging environment. I did read something once. There's a study that says that girls do better in girls' schools and boys do better in mixed schools. But
how interesting.
I don't know whether that's still the case, or I can't attest to the evidence underlying that. But yeah, I just thought what came through strongly was these dynamics and these hierarchies. And you see that in the village, you see that in the city, and you see that in the school. And I thought she told those stories really well. They resonate. I could feel the tension. Like I was reading it and picking a side as she was talking about it.
What side did you pick? So which group did you pick in? Because you had the debating club, you had they were apparently the brightest ones, right? Then you had the homemakers and Christians.
Yeah.
And you had the sporty ones. And I liked how she named the various geometries. So you had Nehanda, you had Asantewa. I think did we have Harriet Tubman? One after Harriet Tubman.
I don't remember the names.
Yes. And then the other one was, she's a princess or something, isn't she?
Nehanda, isn't that Nehanda? I said that Nehanda was the Zimbabwean. Was it Zimbabwean?
Yes, but she was a spirit medium.
Uh-huh.
She was a very important spirit medium in the uprising in the 1890s. Or
there was one story: a girl had gone out or had made friends with a girl from another group's boyfriend.
No, she's told the boyfriend.
But they all turned against her, and then allegedly. She was shamed, and it was that. Come on, no one does public shaming or like girls or public rejection. That just I could feel that as I was reading it. This sense of we're not talking to you, and we're going to make sure you know about it. But another group came in to protect her.
That reminds me of another theme that she actually talks about quite a bit. This idea of beauty and how women use their beauty and versus brains. So I thought that she's done that quite well, because I think at the beginning when we meet Kirabo's aunt Ngai, she's I think over 18 or 19. She's still in school. She hasn't done her O-levels yet because she keeps repeating the class, and it's obvious that she's not academic. But and this is the other thing about some of these Ugandan families. We will not accept that someone is not academic. We just, because going to school is, what you do.
It's a status thing as well, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's a social thing.
Yeah. So she's basically hasn't passed her exam, so she keeps repeating. But her father wants her to go to school and to get her O-levels and to graduate and everything, despite the fact that she's not academic and she's not interested. But I thought that Jennifer does really well in describing the contrast between beauty and brains. And there's a bit where Madiba, one of their neighbors. And this is the other thing I really like about this, the how she describes the village life. Everybody is into your business, as I think someone mentioned earlier on. So anybody can come and just sit you down and start giving you advice, regardless of what relationship you have with them. Beauty seems to be the thing that some women use, or at least want to use, to get ahead in life. We also see that with Jibwa. So Ngai stops focusing on her education because she's pretty and she's getting a lot of attention from guys, from men. So she doesn't think that actually she needs, to stay in school because she'll get a man anyway. And then you have Jibwa, Kirabo's best friend, who then, because she's fairer and also curvier, feels that she can use her beauty to get the guy. So, and then
that being said, her ambition always was to be a homemaker, wasn't it?
Yes.
She wasn't so much the career woman. She actually wanted to be a mother and a wife. And
who? Jibwa or
Jibwa?
Jibwa. Did she?
Yes, she did, didn't she? Because remember when they were always playing make believe, Kirabo was always, I think, either a teacher or a nurse or something, and the other girl was always a mother or stay-at-home wife or something.
But is that because that's what she wanted, or because of her status? That's what she aspired to, that because of her status in the society.
I thought it was her status.
She was never really encouraged to do well in school because of where she's come from and the household that she's come from.
And at the end, when they have that confrontation, she says, well, what did you expect? This kind of naivety that we're friends and we've never been equal.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like, she did a really horrible thing to her friend. And she almost articulates it as kind of, what other choice did I have?
Mm-hmm.
This is what I have.
Mm. But it's not the same situation as that other girl that, I think there was that very bright girl, wasn't there, in the boarding school? What's her name?
So I don't think, did they ever give her name? The one that was really great at science and maths.
Yeah.
Yes. The maid, the one whose father was a minister, mother was a maid.
Yeah, ministers.
Yeah, sorry, Tai, what did you want to say about her?
But I wanted to say that she had the talent and the gifts to pursue such a path, I guess. But she didn't really have the inclination, did she?
Yeah. She just wanted to be a housewife.
It wasn't something she wanted.
But again, you think that's also to do with how she's been brought up, in that she's her mother was a maid, and I didn't get the idea that she grew up with her father.
No, I didn't get that idea either.
Yeah, so if you're growing up with a mum who's a maid, maybe she doesn't have the aspirations. Her mother doesn't have the aspirations and doesn't inspire her to be anything other than a wife. Because that, as a woman, being a wife kind of guaranteed you some sense of security.
But at the same time, the environment within which she was growing up, the boarding school environment, was like a hothouse for people to develop aspirations towards careers, to become professional women, to consider the status that would attach to them according to professions that they pursue, to consider academic excellence. So it wasn't to say she wasn't in an environment where there wasn't anything that might have encouraged her to look, further, broader, to be aspirational.
Yeah, I felt that going back to Jibwa, although I agree with you, Jackie, that she was brought up in a model where that's how she was going to be. But you've got other examples of people who've sort of moved against the way society is moulding them. I mean, Nattetta especially. So there's a sort of interplay of personality as well, isn't there? Or even like Tom's wife, who all society is telling you that you should accept his child, that isn't your child, but that you should accept that child into your family. And she's adamant that she doesn't want that to happen in her house. So I think there's always a mixture of helping.
I agree. Yeah, that point about the wife as well, who doesn't want to accept the child. But when you say, like, I agree, like the interplay of personality, but it's also the society around you. Because doesn't she then speak to her mother about that? And her mother tells her, this is what you need to accept.
She does, yeah.
Yeah, so you have
She still resists, though.
Yeah.
Her husband wanted Kirabo to live with them. She resisted for many years, didn't she?
Yeah.
And even when he brought her, she didn't last long, did she, before the wife had managed to evict her?
I do want to explore that a little, that setup a little bit. So in society, in the patriarchal society in which they're living, it's fine for a man to do that, a man to have a child outside and then bring them for the wife to raise. I find that frustrating that within society, women are expected to just, accept children that men have had outside, but men are not willing to raise children born outside of the relationship with the woman. I mean, I know that's now changing somewhat, but there are plenty of men out there who will not date a woman who already has a child. Mm-hmm. But they expect women to date them when they have children.
Or you get these tropes about the wicked stepmother. That scene, actually, because when they first interact, the stepmother, you side with kind of the protagonist.
You do, yeah.
Like, well, who does this stepmother, who does this woman think she is? Isn't she the daughter? She has a right to be there. But as you kind of go through, as the story progresses, she goes to see her mum and her mum tells her to accept it. And you understand, well, she experienced this as a child herself and she doesn't want that. And even when you get to the end, like post-funeral, and how she's being treated, and I think it's the grandfather who comes in and just tells them all to calm down.
Yeah.
It's immediately like, even us, I'd like to think maybe we're empathetic and enlightened. Your default maybe is to kind of side against her. But actually, she has found herself in a difficult position, and it's not unreasonable for her to say, this isn't what my idea of a family was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Us being together was going to be. And she's been forced to accept it. It's not a discussion. This is the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
That must be a difficult position to be in. But then I thought things that articulated was going to is that clash between modern ideals and, culture or tradition, sorry.
Mm-hmm. When Kirabo first arrived, I did actually feel sorry for the stepmother, because I thought that was a sort of fairly typical old scenario where the man just brings someone into the house without even consulting you beforehand and telling you that she's coming there. But then you sort of realize that the stepmother did know about it. It wasn't like a surprise, or that this had been debated many times before. And I felt she should be more accepting. But when you look at the situation the other way around with Kirabo's mother, and you sort of think, well, it is very much sauce for one, is the goose isn't sauce for the gander, isn't it? You sort of feel it's an old way of life, just assuming that the wife is going to accept the child into the house, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But is it a fair comparison, though? Because with Nambi, when she's thinking about how her mother was treated by her father, my understanding was that the father would bring a number of, children. So he's kind of out there doing his thing. And so he could bring any number of, this is my child by this woman, this is my child by this other woman, this is my child, and so on. And the expectation is all on his wife. They're all my children, so you should raise them anyway. Whereas with Tom, he had Kirabo long before he met Nambi.
Yeah.
And it's not as if, I would assume it's not as if to say Nambi didn't know what she was getting into to a large extent when she said, okay, fine, let's move together. let's have a family, let's have our own children. So Kirabo would have been existing before then.
But
And I don't go on.
Sorry. Well, I was just, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say that if I read it correctly, she had told Tom from the beginning that she wasn't going to raise somebody else's child, another woman's child.
Yeah.
So they both went into the marriage with him knowing her opinion on that and her knowing that there was a child, but her having stated her position, which he then seeks to overturn once he's in the marriage. So it might not be a parallel, but I don't think it's as simple as saying that she knew what she was getting into.
Fair enough.
For 12, 13 years, Kirabo has lived in the village, right? So as far as she's concerned, that's an okay arrangement. She can manage that, fine, but he has a daughter, but she doesn't live here. And if I read it correctly, on the day or on the night he brings Kirabo to the city, that's a surprise.
He hadn't told her, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. And then I goes to the other thing, Ty, was just going to add on to what he said about Nambi's mum accepting or at least bringing up all these other children. The other thing also, I can't remember whether or not she had co-wives, but in the village, most of the men had multiple wives anyway. So when you brought a child, it wasn't as if the child was, the children did not see themselves as belonging to one mother or a specific mother. They were just brought up communally, and they were all the co-wives were their mothers. Whereas in this situation, she's in town living a modern life, so a European life, should we say, where, it's you and your husband and your children, and you have flowers in the garden and all of that. So she's kind of embraced modern life, and I think her situation is quite different to that of her mother's.
Yes. And at the same time, I guess, if you're not going to visit Tom's people in the village, if you're kind of cutting yourself off, some people might argue that you're cutting yourself off from the root, almost, as it were, then yeah, I guess you could. It's like you're giving up a lot, and some may argue you're burying your head in the sand, because eventually this thing that you are refusing to address will come back, and probably come back with interest to bite you, because these village people, they're not going away, are they? This whole kind of sphere, this whole life is there, and is actually an integral part of Tom's life, because Tom still goes to the village and sees his people, just that his wife never goes. And that is just kind of heaping up problems, I guess, I would assume, for Tom. Where is your wife? Where are your children? That kind of thing. Even if he took his children to the village, I don't think Nambi would be that keen to go and see his people, and that would be problematic. Sooner or later, it will all come to a head.
Nambi's a citizen.
Actually, now you say that seems to me more strange, that Tom goes to the village, but he doesn't take his other two children. That is a bit odd, isn't it, that they live this very separate existence. I can sort of think she might get away with not going to the village, but not to take the children is odd.
So the dynamics of family relationships, especially between mothers and daughters, is really central to the story. And I think one that's particularly problematic is that between Kirabo and her mother, and how it's that relationship or lack of relationship. I just want to explore how it affects her and her relationships with the other women in her life.
How it affects Kirabo. Because that's a theme that runs throughout the whole story, isn't it?
Yeah.
The fact that there is this missing mother, and how that impacts, I guess, adversely, isn't it? It doesn't bring a benefit to Kirabo. There's always that void, that mother-shaped void in her life, and how she seeks to fill it. And there's always the question of why is the mother, my biological mother, absent? And I'm not sure that there's actually a resolution, or maybe not a satisfactory resolution.
Or for her.
For Kirabo, but it made me wonder what caused her mother to not, well, I guess to reject Kirabo in some ways.
Patriarchal society. It's the patriarchal society within which she lives in. She is going to rightly or wrongly, be seen in a certain way because she's, had this child when she was young. So it's this patriarchal society within which they live. And
I thought it was more than that, though. It seemed to me as if it was more than that, because, I would have found it hard to believe that her husband wouldn't have known about this outside child.
I don't think he did. Until she turned up, I don't think he did.
Yeah, but what his reaction wasn't,
his reaction wasn't as she was expecting.
Yes.
But then he's a modern man who lives in the city.
Was your expectation that in that moment the mother would say, yes, I do want to get to know you? Because I wondered, I read that thinking, this feels more realistic to me than if it had been tears, wide open arms, come here, my love, I've missed you all this time. She does, not for bad reasons, but Kirabo does ambush her. So she's been this secret and this thing she's held back for a long time, whatever story she's told herself. And then she just confronts her. And I think there is a line where Kirabo maybe regrets going about it that way. Like it's like in the moment she realizes what she's done. This might have
been. She was warned, wasn't she? Kirabo was warned not to. But at the same time, you consider Kirabo as being a young person. So
she is, because we see there's this snapshot of a moment. And I'd like to think, maybe I'm being too optimistic, but months or years down the line, when dust has settled, she might come back to her. She might want to reach out to her. But in that moment, it just felt so... We've been with Kirabo all those years. We know the emotion that's built up inside of her and how this is played on her mind. So this is her moment. This is her. She's got it all out, and we fully understand why. But if you're on the receiving end of that, in the moment, how do you react? Do you I think the Hollywood story is, you'll break down, I love lots of hugs, but I can imagine it must have been quite a shock for her as well. Particularly just going back to what Jackie says, like the reasons she would have given her up. Like it was nice that the husband wasn't as angry, but if in her head that's what she feels she's been protecting all these years. Yeah, sorry, Katrina, you're going to come in.
I was just wondering, in that era, would it be unreasonable for them to get married, maybe informally? But I know the family is very religious, but would that have been one option for them, do you think? Because I'm just sort of thinking in Zimbabwe, well, if your daughter is pregnant by somebody, there's a massive pressure on that family that the father should marry.
Yeah.
And that's wearing off, but it's still very much there. So I sort of wondered if that was a possibility, do you think, for her, if she had it, accepted and so on.
I'm just wondering also, did the family know at this point that actually these two had gotten together and that, they'd had this child and before the child came?
I don't think so. Do you? I doubt if Tom was busy telling them.
I didn't get that because I got the feeling that Tom just turned up with this child and that was that. And by then, I can't remember her name now. She'd left. And I don't even feel that they were in a proper relationship. At that point, they were probably just fooling around and then she got pregnant.
But that wouldn't necessarily let you off in some societies, would it? But it does make you wonder, 13 is very young, even back a few generations, it's still quite young. It does beg the question of what actually would have happened, but we don't. I mean, now it would be seen in a different light anyway in this modern era. But so
Kirabo has a lot of other women in her life. So she has her grandmother who brings her up. And we haven't even mentioned Taiwo's favorite person, Nsota. She also has an impact on her. And then we have Auntie Abby, who looks after her when she's in the city. I just wanted to explore her relationship and how she's developed in those relationships.
Come on, Taiwo, what do you think?
Want me to mansplain how to be a woman?
Yes.
Don't we all?
We normally don't have to ask.
You are out of order. So they all substitute mothers then?
They are, in a way, because she's quite wayward, isn't she?
She is. I like how she gets something different from each of those relationships. I like that, Aunt Abby, I really liked her kind of unconventional by, standards of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And Sutu kind of encourages her, slightly perhaps manipulates her in the beginning as well. She's no innocent, clearly, the way she uses what she knows about the mother and then her grandmother. I thought it was a really kind of strong part of the story and her own coming of age, that each of them were able to give her something different.
Mm-hmm. And
but she still wanted the knowledge, though, didn't she? I think there was still something lacking. Although I guess the absence of a mother or absence of a parent will affect people in different ways. But for Kirabo, she still wanted to know, I think, even if maybe not necessarily have a relationship, but she wanted to have the knowledge of her mother, her biological mother. Because I agree with what you were saying, Kay, in terms of a Hollywood kind of, I've missed you all these years, Yeah, it's much more realistic the way the mother rejected her, even when she fetched up on her doorstep.
In that kind of society, you see children as, people, you bring them up. You don't sit down with them and reason with them and explain things to them. They've got a roof over their head. They're going to school. They've got food. What else do they need? Right?
Exactly. And a very loving family. I mean, she's got a very close relationship with her grandfather as well as her grandmother. And she's quite spoiled, really, isn't she?
She is, very much so, especially by her grandfather. And I think that kind of reminds me of a line in the book where she says, they were talking about birthdays. And then I think it was either one of the grandmothers says, well, why do we celebrate children's birthdays? It's not as if they've contributed or done anything to deserve, being celebrated on their birthdays. If anything, they're the ones that should be, paying for being born.
Sounds like one of the elders in my family would say.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
That reminds me also of Days of the Week and Time, where when the Europeans came, they now started to count time, whereas before they never counted time, and the grandmothers couldn't see why you count time. And so that brings me to the issue of colonialism and post-colonial identity. What were the effects of colonialism on Ugandan society from what you got from the book? Or did you not get anything?
Well, I got the missionaries had done a very thorough job amongst some of the people in her village anyway. I find it a bit surprising the way, not just that the family were very practicing of Christianity, they didn't seem to have any, how people often will sort of combine both things, or they'll practice Christianity, but they'll also do some of the more traditional things. Apart from some of the things about women's bodies, there didn't seem to be much traditional religion. Yeah. So I suppose that's part of the colonial effect.
Well, there's that, and then there's education, isn't there? Because you have Nsuta and the grandmother, I can't remember grandmother's name, Mama Mira. Yeah, so you have her and Nsuta going to school for the first time, and the school was set up by the Europeans, wasn't it? And then you also had the clash between Mira's family, and then I think it was the traditional clan family, because Mira's family was more modern. But you say that, Katrina, about people not practicing both. Wasn't Mira doing that in a way by marrying, but also having a side chick? The reason why he didn't marry her was because he was a Christian and his father would have frowned upon it.
Exactly.
He decided to have both women, but just not marry the other.
Well, isn't that the modern way of doing it?
Is it?
Well, I don't know, but like to have an official wife and to have other relationships instead of recognizing and giving proper respect to the second and subsequent wives. To me, that's the compromise that comes from, I suppose you could say it's still traditional for the man to have more than one wife, perhaps.
Although I like the way that the story actually shows that Nattetta and Alikissa, isn't it?
Yeah.
How they actually, from when they were young, had planned the whole thing, although maybe not necessarily a very realistic, plan to have actually implemented all these years later. And also it had some shaky legs upon which it was built. But still, the fact that there isn't just a situation of, oh, it's all about the men. It's also about things going on behind the scene or underground to do with the women, and the women actually moving the men around like chess pieces without the men necessarily even knowing. But there are consequences, aren't there?
Yeah, so I just wondered if you could explain that a little bit.
Yeah, it was a whole issue, wasn't it, of let's share a man, we'll share a husband, and how it came about. But I guess it's because the story is based on myths as well as a straightforward story. So it all kind of weaves the whole idea of myths and legends, stories and fables, as well as a straightforward story, as these are the lives of individual people and this is how they live their lives. It makes sense that way. Because when it started with the whole issue of don't come back, the man saying to his 3 wives, or eventually 3 wives, don't bring me any more girl children. So he's just expecting his wife to knock out the children, obviously, because the fact that he's determined
the sex of the child. Yeah.
Let's put that to one side, but don't bring me any more girl children. And then the whole child in the anthill and all the rest of it. So there are all these fables and legends, aren't there?
So then the women being water, and how men and women came about, and the whole origin story.
Creation myths,
yeah.
Which is interesting. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the way she wove it all into the story.
Yeah. So I read somewhere where some people were calling elements of this novel magical realism. I don't know where that magical realism thing came from.
Multi what?
Magical realism.
Oh, magical realism.
Yeah.
I don't see it. But...
Well, I didn't see it either. But there's a couple of reviews that I read where they said, oh, they wish she'd continued further down the path of magical realism after Kirabo stopped flying. I'm like, but that wasn't really magical realism.
No, because I like.
No, I think
that.
Sorry, Tyler. Sorry. Oh, I was just going to say, I think the people who said that misunderstood the flying at the beginning. It wasn't really magical realism. It was a kind of dreaming, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, at least that's what I think. I didn't see it as magical realism at all.
And whether it was a real out-of-body experience or whether it was something that was simply imagined and that she grew out of, I didn't read it as magical realism in that way. I just felt it was something that happened to her at that time in her life.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
In the same way that, some people are said to have second sight, or some people can, read your palm and tell you your future, all those kind of things. Whether it's real or whether it's imagined is all debatable, isn't it? But that area where it's not black, it's not white, it's grey. I liked that, the way that she made it quite ambiguous. It made it much more realistic to me.
Yes, because people report these experiences and none of us really know what they are. So you can't be one thing or another about them.
I have no idea what they're looking at because I didn't see any magical realism in this at all. I just thought this was like a normal, earthy, non-magical storyline. So I didn't see that at all. Yeah. So I'm just gonna read out an extract, and this is said by one of the popular girls from the debating club. in the boarding school. And
what page are you?
Sorry?
What page?
175. It's about Mwenkano, which we'll come back to in a minute. So it says, any Mwenkano is radical. Talk about equality, and men fall in epileptic fits. So feminism, or Mwenkano, as it's called in this book, it plays a central theme in this book. And it starts with Nsuta and basically carries on throughout the story. And I just wanted to explore the idea of feminism, but against the idea of Kweluma, which is the idea that it's women who enforce patriarchy. So it's women who actually bring other women down rather than men doing it. I just wanted to, talk about, first of all, how feminism comes across in the book, that and gender identity, and then talk about the women and how sometimes it's women who bring down other women rather than fighting the cause and progressing the rights of women.
I think this is a...
Sorry. Go on, Kay.
I was going to say, I thought they were represented in different ways, sort across the novel. It's kind of represented in the boarding school, but actually through some of the way that some of the characters live. I'm thinking about like Aunt Abby, who kind of is subverting the expectations. You know, she's not getting married and settling down. She's got quite this rebellious streak to her. So I think what I liked about how feminism is talked about, it's not just this idea that is preached. It's also explored in the way some of these characters choose to live their life as well, regardless of what society says about them. Even, isn't there the eldest aunt who is
Sandai,
like a man?
Yeah,
she's just confident and puts people in her place. So even in her way, she's being quite radical in her behaviour and the way she carries herself.
Page 88, she talks about herself. So she's the Senga, and she's talking to the teenagers who are always at Mira's house. She asked them, "Who am I?" And Senga, they replied. And what does that mean? It means if. Let me hear the whole saying, she says. If you were not a woman, the teenagers would chorus, you would be our father too. Because she's basically taken on this male identity. And she's strong, she's a strong woman, but because she's a woman, she can't inherit, she can't get what Miro has. But really, she carries on as if she's a man. In fact, they actually, previous to that, it says that she was one of those women who were men in their brothers' houses. She called grandmother wife. Grandmother knelt as she waited on her. And I think even at the clan meeting, they were saying that had she attended the clan meeting, there is no way she would have sat on the floor with other women. She would have just kicked Tom Jr. off the chair and would have taken the chair herself.
How much of this is to do with the fact that Miro is very wealthy? And so the issue of affluence has provided some kind of buffer. Because, I mean, money speaks, doesn't it? And so when you have a lot of money, and Miro has land, he has cattle, he has status, and he's not had it just for a short period of time. This is old money. I mean, then you can do and you can undo because you have the wealth that will back up, that when you speak, people will listen. Even if you're saying rubbish, people will still listen.
But how is that relevant to Anton Sangi behaving the way she behaves?
I think that's relevant because she is the only daughter. She's the only sister, isn't she? She's Miro's only sister.
I can't remember if she's
Sangi. Yeah.
Are you saying she's... Sorry.
No, I'm just agreeing. She's the only sister. I'm just looking at the cast list here.
Okay.
Yeah, the cast of key characters.
So, Taiwo, is your point that she can only behave that way because of her class?
I'm saying it's a considerable factor in that she has wealth backing her up.
Yeah.
I think that this idea of being the female brother is in some societies anyway, that does give you status in that context when you're with the brothers' wives and their children. But going back to what you were saying about feminism, I mean, Miro is remarkably new man, isn't he? We don't know why, but I mean, his attitude to all the women in the family do give them a lot of opportunities to develop that I don't know how typical that is, even of a rich man. I wouldn't expect it to be very typical.
But he's gone to school. He's been educated quite highly, hasn't it? So I guess he's been exposed because he's lived in the city as well. So I think some of that comes from there. The idea that you can actually challenge patriarchy, and also the idea that you can see how education benefits you and your family. At least I think that's why he's quite, in inverted commas, enlightened.
That is a theme throughout, though, isn't it? That education is what is a way out, particularly for the women. The stories, when we're talking about them, maybe they seem quite trivial compared to the other stories, the dynamics of the boarding school. But actually, it's an education beyond her academic education. It's about being with these other people and managing conflicts, etc. In Suta herself, she has quite a really strong story about she's adamant she's going to stay, and she's going to go away, and she's going to become a nurse, and she's going to aspire to more than those around her expect.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like this would have been a weaker story had it not had these kind of different representations of women and their attitudes and how they were going about asserting themselves and asserting their rights.
Mm-hmm.
This, for me, it just feels more realistic that you do have some people who will strive towards, and you do have some people who are ambivalent and hold you back, and you do have some people who become quote-unquote allies. I think what I liked about it more than that is, this is set in Uganda in the 1970s. This idea of like feminism or the criticism, just thinking back to some of the other books that we've read like this year, being this, it's this we often hear about this Western manifestation of feminism, and it's about asserting for these rights or burning your bra, etc. And it's like, well, no, these women are going about it in their own way.
Yeah.
No, they have to be quite strategic about it. I'm thinking of Aunt Abby at the end when she's trying to advocate for Kirabo to have more. And ultimately she doesn't get more, but she ends up with more than she expected or more than would normally have been allowed. It's not complete, it's not equality, it's not 50-50, but they're all going out and asserting themselves in the best way they know how.
Yeah, and I think earlier on in Suta does, in that scene where she's listening to the radio and she's listening to some women's conference taking place some country abroad, and she's basically saying how they're going about it the wrong way, or how Western women are doing feminism the wrong way. And I do agree with you. It does show that actually this idea of feminism, we may not call it that, has always been there. Women have always been there fighting for equality, fighting for their rights.
But and opinions will always differ, because like where Kay was saying and Suta was fighting for something more. But a lot of the women who were her contemporaries might think that she ended up with less, and didn't particularly think the fact that she had a profession and she had quite a lot of knowledge of different things, but she never gets a husband. A lot of women would still see that as it's not necessarily as good. And I think that's true today and in society generally, not Uganda. I think that could be in many, many societies. It's interesting at the end, somewhere near the end, and Suta says about Kirabo that she kind of thought, as if she thinks Kirabo's sort of given in or hasn't become whatever she was hoping for her, which I don't know. I interpreted that to be because she was so involved with, what's the young man's name, Sio.
We haven't
and she accepts him regardless of his behaviour.
That rings true. And I think there's a line actually when Kirabo kind of reflects, says she knows she's a person who's going to forgive him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But is that wrong? Why should, that's how she is and that's how she feels. I don't see that it's something to criticize, but Nsuta seems to be critical of it. Or if that's what Nsuta thinks is where she's not fulfilled the wildness. I think Nsuta saw her as very groundbreaking, and that she feels that she's compromised and she's not as groundbreaking. But what did Nsuta really want her to do?
Your point about that, maybe today those attitudes still persist in some way, those kind of expectations and the questions, just reminded me of a conversation I had earlier at work. Like, somebody I'm working with, he asked me, and this was like small talk, like over lunch. He asked me if I have a boyfriend, if I have children, do I want children? And I just thought, I was just like taken aback by those questions. It's not that I'm ashamed of the answer, or I don't care to answer that, but I just thought it's a bit bold. Like,
it's very personal, very personal.
Those are the questions, and I've heard other women around me being asked those as well. Those kind of framing of, well, you're a woman, those are our expectations, those are the things we ask. And, I think there's this courtship. Yeah. And those are the questions that are asked of her. Those are the expectations. It's perfectly normal for them to, when you get married, what? You're still working? Why are you still doing that? Why are you still studying? These kind of expectations and what people think it's okay to ask you about. Maybe some of it is the lack of boundaries in village life as well. But it just, you saying that to me just reminded me of that conversation and just being a little bit taken aback of, what about weather or politics? Come on.
It's amazing how, although we've come a long way, things just really haven't changed that much either, isn't it?
My impression is that women do want to have children, and not every single woman, obviously, but a lot of women do, and they might leave it later. They might want to have professions and so on and work, but they still are very motivated to having children. Now, whether that's conditioning of society or not, or if it's something biological, when you talk about women keeping each other in the patriarchy, I think it is still very much that women, many women want to have children, and society almost takes it like it's a right, which is why you're allowed to have all sorts of IVF. Older women, my age group, start worrying about grandchildren and that. It seems to me it's still a very common theme in society.
Agreed. If they ask if there are any specific quotes that you have from the book that you liked, any specific parts that kind of resonated with you that you'd like to share, I found a quote, in fact, two actually. So the first one, this is Jai, and she's basically describing Jai, and she says, Guy. She carried on with her man like a bug had burrowed into her brain. For Kirabo, no matter what people said, Jai was not responsible for her actions. Not with her floaty eyes that made her look like she was half asleep. Not with men calling her shapely backside shock absorbers.
I remember that line.
It was so hilarious.
I remember that.
And then she goes on. I mean, this is like in the same paragraph. Ugly girls were good girls. They worked hard in school. But for Jai, the world had stared, admired. She had noticed, and her brain had stopped working. She just has this way with words and how she describes things. There's another section where she was describing Tinsangai, and I don't think I have the exact words, but she was describing her, and she was talking about how she has high blood pressure, and doctors had told her to skip. And the grandmother says, when you get to a stage where doctors are asking you to skip rope, it means that your laziness is so middle-aged. It has grandchildren. I just thought, it's just like, how does she come up? How did she come up with these things? For me, most of it was just me laughing out loud at some of the turn of phrases that she used. And I just really liked it for that. She's just hilarious. So were there any other comments or quotes that you found funny or you found profound?
I mentioned earlier just the kind of after the funeral, the reflections there.
Mm-hmm.
I could read the quotes to you because I don't have the book. I gave it to somebody at work to read. And she actually messaged me just yesterday to say how much she loved the book.
Oh, good.
Moments that were quite moving to her. So she said the scene at the end where the grandmother and Suta shower in the rain like they did when they were as kids killed me. And the bit where Kirabo's childhood friend points out that they aren't and will never be equal. Class commentary in that, which is left unresolved, is so good. The analogy of the fingers on the hand not being equal. So I can't bring you quotes, but I can bring you another fan of the book.
Yeah, it's a great book. Tayo, is there anything that stayed with you, or Katrina?
I was going to say the ending where the grandmother and Nsuta are showering in the rain, and the tenderness of grandmother assisting Nsuta because Nsuta is still poorly, isn't she?
Yeah.
And how she reacts to just being in nature and just being free. And Kirabo is watching them and seeing that deep relationship between the two of them, despite everything that they've gone through. I thought the way she described everything and set the scene, it was remarkable. She has a way with words. Yeah, definitely, I agree. Then there was that other part where, and this is a quote, so the expression where they're saying, however, not everyone would take their voice to Tom's widow. If something wasn't right, Abby was to be contacted, so Tom's widow would listen to only one person. So that whole idea of taking your voice is probably something that you can almost literally say in whatever language that they speak. But, if you translate it, it probably, you take your voice. I thought that was great. And then the other scene, another tender scene where Kirabo wants to lie down. She's having a period and she wants to lie down. So she goes to Miro and asks Miro to let her lie down on his bed. And it says that she ran after Miro and whispered that she wanted to lie down. They didn't look at each other as they walked to the house. He opened the door to his bedroom. Jaja Nsangi was asleep on his bed. He asked her to shove close to the wall. Kirabo slipped inside his bed and smelled the sheets. It felt like childhood. So Miro's got not only his granddaughter, but he's also got his only sister, Jaja Nsangi, sleeping in his bed. So it's that kind of not just comfort, but safety that he provides for them. I thought that was very, very well done.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of standout phrases and passages and sentences.
So overall, I really enjoyed it. And I think this kind of like brings us, I guess, to the end of our feminist-related books, doesn't it? Because we've done, we started off with In the Ditch, which was about these women in living on an estate.
Mm.
And then, I don't know, Decolonizing My Body, would we add that to the feminist list?
In the writer's mind it was, but I think we have no idea.
And then we had Entire Woman. That's definitely, a feminist book. So so this...
But even Glory.
Sorry?
Even Glory, you could add Glory to it as well.
I don't know. I don't know if I would add Glory, though. Because Glory, for me, was more political than feminism. Very political, in fact.
True.
But those were good. I hadn't even clocked that, but those were a really good example of how you can approach feminism in different ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you had the Ain't I a Woman, this kind of essay approach, and we spoke about that, and you had Decolonizing My Body. But of the three, the one that resonated with me, and maybe it's because the format of the book, but this is the one that I felt kind of really nailed that sense of difference and striving in your own way, and this is what feminism can mean to me rather than or mean to different women. And rather than this, the more strident, this is what it means to be a feminist, that for some people can be quite off-putting.
Yeah.
I think stories like this are far more effective at getting that story across, or getting that.
Yeah, I agree with you a lot, and because it's almost more about the choices that are available instead of like maybe in days gone by when there wasn't much, you had to make the best of however it turned out for you. That women having that much more opportunity to choose which way they go, even if they choose a more traditional way. Like we were talking one week about trad wives. It is at least a choice. It's not something that's necessary. And the first woman, because it gives so many different women and the way they've handled their life, I think it reflects that nicely.
So I'll end with a quote from the book. So she says, "The idea that girls expect a word from a man to make them feel good about themselves is another myth, perhaps to justify men's behavior or men's bad behavior."
Who is the first woman?
That is a good question. Anyone going to venture an answer?
That is something I thought about, and
it's Theo and his idea of Nkwenu, isn't it? Obviously on his terms.
Exactly. Men are always feminists when it's on their terms, isn't it?
I can say nothing.
That's a good thing, actually, because he comes across as the nice guy.
Yeah. However,
he's the quintessential nice guy. He will never hurt her.
What my uncle used to say about, he never used to say a snake in the grass. He used to say the green snake in the green grass. It's just like seriously camouflage. You never saw it coming.
I liked Nsuta's Nigerian lover.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Until he went back to Nigeria.
Yes.
He did, but he did tell her that he would be going back.
But he looked after her when they were together.
I think she was okay. She was okay with that. Sorry, Taiwo.
Coming back to the first woman, so I did have a think about that, and I thought that actually there were quite a few first women here. So you have Nsuta can be considered to be the first woman, but also you could flip it because Miro married Alikisa in the end. Actually, she's the first woman, and then Nsuta did not become the first woman, although she was kind of first in his eyes. And then you can also have, what's her name?
Gai. What about Gai, that she eloped?
I don't know. I don't consider Gai the first woman.
Say that she broke out of the whole patriarchy. She went her own way.
But was that intentional? Did she think? I don't know. Did she think about it, or was she just driven by her passion for her man?
This is the escape on the back of the motorcycle.
Yeah.
Was it with the guy who became her husband?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, it was. Okay. I didn't get that point when I was reading it, but okay.
Yeah.
I did think at one point, is it Kirabo? It's about her writing her own story. Actually, there was another, that's just prompted me. You asked about quotes. There was a really good line in there. I think Nsuta's telling her the importance of writing your own story.
Yeah, I got that. I'll read it out to you.
Yeah.
Because I actually made a note of that. And she says, "Stories are critical, Kirabo. The minute we fall silent, someone will fill the silence for us." So that actually is very important. So in America, I think it's called A Girl is a Body of Water, which I think is a rubbish title.
Where did that come from?
No, there's a story in there about women coming out of water.
From the sea.
Yeah, women coming from the sea and then men coming from
the land.
No, like where's that come from? Like I think what I can't get around in my head at the moment is how you could read that whole novel and that be the title. Like you're saying, the magical realism.
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand how you got to the end of that book and thought, I wish there was more magical realism. Like what? She's just given you so much on a plate. It's like being given 4 courses and going, oh, I wish I had a 5th.
I think maybe I was thinking the reviewer who wrote that only read the first couple of chapters or something, I think. and then wrote their review. When I first thought about the title, I thought it was referring to the school where everybody was the first this and the first that who'd been taught at the school. And then gradually you think of all the different possible first women, including Kirabo's mother, I suppose, as kind of starting the whole thing.
I enjoyed this book. Like, I didn't know what to expect. Hadn't come across it before, but I just thoroughly enjoyed it.
Right. So when I first started reading it, I read it up to halfway, and I had to stop myself from reading it because I was going to finish it way before we were going to meet to have the discussion, so that I didn't rush to the end. But it's
a good sign. Good sign that you are really enjoying the book.
Yeah. So I guess what's the only thing that's left for me to ask is a summary.
I'll give it a 4.5.
Definitely 4. I don't usually go above 4, but I'm sort of inching above 4 because I really enjoyed it. It's got lots of, as you say, really well-written phrases and sentences, although I couldn't recall any to find them quickly for us. And it's really interesting because it gives you a strong picture of the village life that she has and the school life. Yeah, I just enjoyed it thoroughly. So definitely 4, nearly 4.5.
Yeah, I think at the start of this I would have said 4, but just this discussion I'm going to go 4.5. I give those out rarely, but like I said before, I really enjoyed it. It's what I love about being part of a book club. I don't think I would have picked this up on my own, so I'm really glad that this was recommended. And yeah, I've said I was engrossed when I was at work. It was I quite looked forward to lunch and reading it, and that's what prompted somebody else to approach me and say, "Is that a good book? Can I have it after you've finished?" So, yeah.
I said 4.5. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I said 4.5, and that I really enjoyed learning how to pronounce a lot of the names, because when I read it, I kept saying Kirabo, not Kirabo. So I thought it was just a strong story, really. The themes that run through the whole of the story were just so engaging. I just really enjoyed it. Great.
And your second message? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I thought you'd stopped, but I do want you to get on your second message that you've typed into the chat.
Oh, the trifling Negroes. It's the men. It's just that weakness, though, isn't it, with Sio and the rest of them, where it's just like, oh, if you don't accept my daughter from outside our relationship, then you're punishing the innocent. I'm just thinking, why did you have the daughter in the first place when you knew that, well, you said you were in love with this particular woman, that she kind of was everything that you wanted? Why are we just going to put this fly in the ointment? I just don't know. But maybe I'm just being unrealistic.
I'm glad that it's you, Taiwo, that said that, because I think if a woman had said that, we would be seen as man bashing. So I'm glad that that's actually come from you.
It was just disappointing, though, the way he behaved. It was just disappointing.
Uh-huh.
Especially as he knew Kirabo and Kirabo's story. I mean, he knew to kind of stay away from that stuff.
But he was so weak. He was so weak. Unforgivable. But anyhow, let's not dwell on that. So yeah, I give it a 4.5 out of 5 as well. Again, rare that I do that, but I enjoyed this so much. I've got and Manchester Happened on my Kindle, so I'm trying to stop myself from reading that because I've got a lot of other books on the list that I need to get through. I read Chintu when it was first published in 2013 and absolutely loved it as well. So I'd recommend that to you guys or any listeners. I mean, any of her books, I think, if you pick it up, you're not going to be disappointed. Great writer.
Neither of these books are continuations or precursors.
No. So Chintu, actually, go and find out about it yourself. I was going to tell you what it's about, but actually,
tell us.
I think it's better that you go and find out about it.
Just a couple of sentences.
It's set in Uganda as well. So, and this is the other thing that I like about her book. It's very much central to Uganda, the Uganda region and Baganda people and Baganda tradition. I mean, Uganda is very varied in terms of ethnic groups or tribal groups. Very varied, but her books are very central to the Uganda and Buganda culture. So I feel that I'm learning a lot about that. I can't praise this book enough. Yeah. We'll end there for today. If you've read The First Woman or any of Jennifer Makumbi's books, drop us a line at hello@bookandlounge.com. We'd really want to hear what you think. Till next time, bye bye.